Hello, good afternoon. Today, our guest is psychologist Dr. Mcgue, and we're going to be talking about intelligence and the benefits of a college education for low IQ people. So, Professor Mcgue, we have done several studies on the benefits of IQ, but fewer studies have assessed the benefits of a college education for low IQ people, and even a smaller set of studies and researchers have looked at how low IQ people adjust to life and higher education more broadly. So today we're going to be talking about your paper, not by G alone. So Matt, college, is college beneficial for low IQ students?
Well, I mean, our study, I think, shows that for college, I think is beneficial. It's not necessarily beneficial for everyone, but it can be beneficial certainly for some individuals that have low IQ. Yes.
And remember, Matt, I read your paper, but our listeners did not read it. So when I ask these questions, you're really answering so that the listeners can learn. Because I would have seen some of the conclusions before. A second interesting question that was raised by you and their co-authors in the paper is the extent to which college or social factors affected the development of low IQ students. Would you attribute it to the fact that they went to college or to their family or other social relations?
So Lipton, I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear before, so I hope I'm answering your questions right. But then if I'm not doing it right, you'll just let me know.
Okay, so the first question was this: do low IQ people benefit from going to college? That was the first question, and the second question is that these benefits that are derived, are they as a result of college or other social factors? So the first, when I posed the first question, you noted that they do benefit when they go to college, and the second question is the reason for these benefits. Is it because of college or other social factors?
Okay, so that's a big question. So we know from a lot of research, I mean, there's hundreds of studies that have shown that individuals who complete a college degree do better socially and economically than individuals who do not complete a college degree. A question that people debate, and Lipton, I'm assuming you're an economist, but maybe I'm wrong on that. But a question certainly some economists debate is whether or not that correlation between completing college and later success, economic and social success, is it due to a cause of college, or is it due to the fact that individuals who complete a college degree, who are admitted to college and then stay with it for at least 4 years or whatever to complete the degree, are they selected for the types of attributes that would later also lead them to be successful? I think that there's probably evidence for both positions. That is, that if you go to college, there are intellectual benefits and social benefits as well from going to and completing a college degree. At the same time, there's a selection effect. People who are selected into college are not a random subset of the general population. And in particular, they tend to more likely have skills that are valued and compensated for in the general population. So the correlation is between college and later success is due both to the fact that people who go to college are a selected subset of the population. That would be a non-causal effect. But also, I think there is some evidence that going to college itself helps you build skills that later increase the likelihood that you're successful in your career.
Matt, in your research, you discuss personality traits and you said that people who delay gratification and exhibit higher levels of self-control, they're more successful. So could you shed some light on the role of personality in relation to your research? Because you're talking quite a bit about personality traits and socioeconomic status and college.
Yeah, so that's a good question, Lipton, and it's something that I've been interested in, and I hope I don't go on here too long. So you'll just stop me if I do. But I got interested in this because of an actual research of a Nobel laureate in economics, Jim Heckman, who maybe you know. Um, Heckman's at the University of Chicago, and he had done a reanalysis of a classic intervention study in developmental psychology. It was called the Perry Preschool Program. Do you know this
Yeah,
program?
you can go ahead.
Okay, so it was the Perry Preschool took children that were quite poor, I think predominantly African American, maybe entirely African American. And they put them through, this was in the early 1960s in the US, and they put them through an intense 2-year preschool program. And we won't, there's no need to get into the specifics of what that program is or was. And what was observed for the graduates of the Perry's preschool program was that, and it was actually a randomized experiment. So some had the intervention, the early preschool, others did not. And what was observed is the ones who had the preschool intervention, initially at the end of the intervention had higher IQs. I can't remember exactly, but it might have been like on average 10 IQ points higher. However, that, and this has been shown over and over in other research, that effect faded away
In
pretty
yes,
rapidly. So
yes.
and maybe within a year or two, their IQs were the same as the IQs of the individuals, the control group that didn't have the preschool. So it made it like every other program, except one thing. They continued to follow those Perry preschool children up into adulthood. And they found that even though the intervention group did not have higher IQs, they did do better in life. They're more likely to get more education. They're less likely to be on government assistance. They're more likely to have stable marriages. But it couldn't have been because of the primary focus of the intervention, which was on IQ. It had to be other factors. And what Heckman and his associates have claimed is that what happened is that, sure, the intervention had this temporary effect on IQ, but the most important thing is it had an enduring effect on the personalities of those children. And that's why they were successful later in life. So that got me interested in non-IQ predictors or influences on social and economic success.
Do
And
do
in
we
our
have
research, we don't, it's, go ahead, sorry.
do we have data on the IQs of the students who are in the control group? Because studies consistently show that the gains of IQ tend to peter out in adulthood.
Yes, there was a control group. There was an experimental group. It wasn't a large study, Lipton. It was, I think, total maybe certainly fewer than 200 children began it, and maybe it was only like 150. So it's very small, but they have IQs on both. And when they started, I'm just trying to recall off the top of my head, but when they started before the randomization, maybe the IQs were on average about 80 in both groups. So they were low, right? And maybe at the end, the experimental group, I don't know the exact numbers, but maybe they had an average IQ of 95. And so there was a benefit associated with the intervention. However, that benefit definitely went away. There's no doubt about that. And virtually there are quite a few of these early intervention studies targeted actually at IQ. In the 1960s, really part of civil rights legislation of that era. And all of them pretty much showed the same thing, that if you could have a temporary effect on IQ, but not a long-lasting effect. at least using the interventions of that time. However, the distinctive things about Perry was, despite not having on average higher IQs than the control group, the experimental group did better. I'm not saying they did overwhelmingly better, but they did significantly better. They still had problems in life, but not as many problems, let's say, as the control group.
Many of these personality traits that conduce success are really correlated with IQ. So long-term orientation, self-control, etc., they're correlated with IQ. So highly intelligent people think long-term, they're also more cooperative and more sociable. They're better at reading emotion than social trends. So I'm not surprised. So as you said with Heckman argued that the intervention had an enduring effect on the personality of the children. He could be correct, but I've been following the work of James Heckman for some time and other researchers, and based on what I have read, early childhood education must be sustained by further interventions in later life. Therefore, if at the preschool level, if the teachers are highly trained and the students become really motivated as a result, these students are likely to do well at the primary and at the secondary and even the tertiary level if they're continually sustained intellectually. So if the preschool teacher is really good, but the primary and secondary teachers are bad and the home situation is also bad, then that student might not do as well as we would expect him or her to do.
And I agree. I have one point of disagreement with you. Maybe it's minor, but I agree with you about the fact that in these studies, if you want to have a long-lasting, enduring effect on cognitive functioning, a preschool program alone will not be enough. You definitely get this. The effect wears off, and it wears off pretty rapidly. And I think the explanation you offer is the standard one, is that you've placed these children in an enriched environment early on, but then you put them back in the environment that wasn't enriched. And why would you expect them in that environment to continue to excel academically? So I will agree with you there. Where I think I'll disagree with you a little bit, hopefully you're okay with that, is the notion that the personality factors we're talking about here are, I don't think you use the term, but I'll use it, highly correlated with IQ. I don't think they are. They're not totally uncorrelated with IQ, but they're not highly correlated with IQ as well. The correlations in our study between the personality factors that we look at, look it up in the paper here, and IQ is not overwhelming. I'll give you the correlation here. I hope you don't mind my looking it up in the table. 11 and 6. So the correlation is 0.18 between the personality factors we explored in that particular study that you're asking me about and IQ. 0.18 is a very large sample, so statistically it's, we know it's different from 0, but it's not. I don't think 0.18 is a large correlation. I think that we're getting at something different than IQ with these personality factors.
Well, and you're not incorrect because in self-control, long-term orientation, openness to experiences, all of these traits are traits that can be explained and studied independently without making reference to IQ. But there is, as you said, a slight correlation. But
Yeah.
self-control as a trait can be explained without making any form of reference to IQ whatsoever. So there
Yes.
is also a broad and rich literature on the effects of self-control. Self-control is correlated with pro-social behavior. So people who are able to exert control are less likely to commit crime. And in criminology, this perspective is actually taught to students. So
Mm-hmm.
self-control is a variable that is independent of IQ, but also slightly correlated with IQ.
Mhm.
Because remember, I don't subscribe to the idea of us having multiple intelligence. That I don't endorse that position any at all. But I do believe that IQ has several domains. It's multifaceted. So self-control, openness, and pro-sociality form a part of the IQ matrix. That's just my theory. That's open
Yeah,
to be
okay.
tested.
I'm not sure what you mean by the IQ matrix, but I understand
Exactly,
what you're saying.
that's
But
my theory. I like to coin new terms
okay,
every now and then.
I think we're in agreement that these are all important factors, including IQ, in terms of thinking about being a successful, contributing member of society. And as you say, there is a matrix of these factors that goes beyond just how one does on an IQ test, even though how one does on an IQ test is by itself pretty important. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
Yes, because if you're good at physics, more than likely you're going to be good at chemistry, mathematics, and also literature. So there's this assumption that if I am good at chemistry, I might not do geography as well because I'm a chemistry person. That was debunked years ago.
Yes, yes, I agree. I agree.
And let me give an anecdotal example. So some students at the high school level, they might not have been motivated and they did, let's say, around 10, 12, 13 subjects. It doesn't really matter. So at that time, they didn't like English. So they always did better at mathematics and physics than English. But they go to college and they have no alternative but to pass their English exam, or because of the nature of the course, they're required to do literature on the assumption that reading well will make you a better writer. And at that
Mhm.
level, they become more motivated. And all of a sudden, this individual who was a bad literature student becomes very smart. And I said, and I usually say, no, he was not a bad literature student. He was just not as motivated. Because based on what we know about IQ, if you're good at one subject, you're going to be good at others. But motivation also plays a key role in explaining performance. So men and women with strong
Uh,
quantitative skills can also do marketing and literature, whereas men with strong quantitative skills, they're likely to fixate on physics, chemistry, etc. So the gains that they would achieve by studying literature are lower than the gains that they're going to achieve when they study physics, even if they're not as good as physics. So this is also another way to look at IQ.
um, yeah, I think the point you make about motivation is something I think is really, really important today, and something that I've been interested in. In our studies, um, we don't measure motivation per se as a personality factor. What we measure is a trait we call alienation, which is certainly related to motivation. And alienation, essentially, at least the way we're assessing it, essentially gets at the notion that you feel you have control over your own life versus if you're alienated, you feel that other people are controlling your life, and they're doing it in a way that's to your disadvantage. And what we find is that people that are high on alienation, or in your rubric, low on motivation, even if they have a high IQ, they're not likely to succeed socially because of that. And the reason I think that's important now is I think that the message many young people are being given, and I hope they don't listen to it if they are being given this, is that the system is out to get them. And there's little they can do because the system is stacked against them. And I think this is particularly true, in my opinion, for like the most disadvantaged members of society. Is they're told that the schools are structured in a way that disadvantages them, society is, and maybe to some extent that's true, but it also has to be terribly demotivating to hear that message over and over again.
Well, this message is the popular leitmotif of our era. some people may refer to it as structural racism or systemic inequities. Whatever terminology they opt to employ, not my concern. But again, we have enough studies on the intrinsic locus of control versus the extrinsic locus of control. So you are right.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
we can also apply this to countries on a national level. At some point, one has to take responsibilities for its failures.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
But what's also interesting, Matt, is that some years ago, a prominent psychologist said that my generation, I'm 28, that younger people, well, at that time I wasn't 28, so he was referring to a slightly older cohort. I don't remember the average age of the cohort, but he said that this generation, people in this generation, they're more likely to delay gratification. Are you familiar with that study?
They're more likely to delay
Yes, it was
gratification?
done by a prominent psychologist. His last name ends with a P. I can't remember it at the moment.
I don't I don't know the study, and in fact, I think there are meta-analyses that would show that that's not true. That meta-analyses combining studies and looking at as a function of age, and so I don't I or as a function of birth year or something, cohort effects. I don't know that we've become more self-controlled with over successive cohorts. I'm
Yeah,
not sure about it, the
yeah. So
literature, but I'm
his
skeptical, let's
his
say.
name is John Prot Protziko. He teaches at the University of California. I wanted him on the show. New research provides more evidence that despite all the doomsaying about the post-millennial generation, Gen Z is doing just fine, perhaps even better than its predecessors. John analyzed
That may be true.
Let me
Yeah,
continue.
I don't know the study.
John analyzed 50 years of data on the famous marshmallow test, which ostensibly measures
Oh, yeah,
children's
okay.
ability to delay gratification. He found that from the 1960s to this year, American kids have gotten steadily better at waiting to get what they want.
Okay. So this is Oliver John?
No, his first name is John and his last name is Prot Zico or Prot Zesco. I don't want to
Okay.
mispronounce his name, but it is
Okay.
Prot
Yeah, I'd have to look at
Zko.
the study. I mean, uh, that may well be true. I don't know. I mean, I'd want to look at the study.
Yeah, I didn't. I read some of it, but that was like maybe a year ago, so I can't comment on the details. But what I do know is that some psychologists and historians argue that affluence is correlated with delayed gratification. So rich people, they have a longer view of time. So I don't know if John controlled for the effect of affluence, but that could be.
But I think probably there is a correlation between affluence and impulse control. And if you're talking about your parents' affluence, um, the family you grew up in, that I'm sure there's a correlation there. It's probably not overwhelmingly large, and the question is, well, why is it there? Is it that I would be skeptical that affluence by itself causes people to delay gratification growing up in an affluent home. Um,
And and
I,
and uh, and again, we still really don't understand the causal mechanism because there are many economists who will tell you that countries get rich because they are patient, and others will say no, they became patient after getting rich. So
uh-huh.
there's a big debate. But affluence seems to have an effect with delayed gratification. So you can go. I didn't read all of the paper, but it would be something for you to read, analyze, and maybe pen a response. I think people are still interested in this topic.
Oh yeah, for sure they're interested in the topic. I agree. Yeah.
But back to your very fascinating paper. Men and women, you said that, let me read it. Of note is that 147, 10.8% of women, but only 45, 3.7% of men were in the low GCA college group and GCA general cognitive ability. Explain what's going on.
Um, well, okay, so I'd have to look up the paper. I won't do that, but it, women, it must be both groups must be graduating from college. So women now graduate from college at a higher rate than men. And we definitely see that in our sample. That's something that actually just occurred in the last generation of the last 25 years, that women probably comprise about somewhere around 55 to 60% of college graduates. And so in our low IQ group that got a college degree, there are many more women in that group than there are men. And I think that's what you're referring to with those
Yes,
statistics. And I think that's a really fascinating
it is.
phenomena where uh, academically, I'm sure you're familiar with the phenomena. Academically, women are doing much better on average than men.
Yes. Hello, Matt.
Yeah, I'm here.
You,
I'm
you can
here. So
continue. There was a pause from it, but you can continue. You said that women are doing much better than men.
yeah, I think all I was trying to say is I think the statistic you're reporting there, and certainly we saw in our study, is that the way we looked at what's sometimes called the expansion of education, the increase of number of individuals, or the rate at which individuals complete a college degree, is we compared adult offspring and the rate at which they had a college degree to their parents. And so obviously that's one generation. You go from the parents to the offspring. And what we observed is that overall, between the parent generation and the offspring generation, there was almost, not quite, but almost a doubling of the frequency of getting a college degree. So it went up quite a bit in 25 years. It went up much greater in women than in men. So if you went back to the parent generation, more men had college degrees than women. But when we looked at offspring, more women had college degrees than men. So it's flipped in one generation. The other thing is that if the number of people getting a college degree, and now in the US, I'm not sure where you're based, Lipton.
I'm in
Are you in the
Jamaica.
US?
No, I live in Jamaica. I'm a Jamaican.
You live in Jamaica. Okay. Oh, that's nice there. It's okay. Um, okay, so you're in Jamaica, but anyway, I don't know the statistics.
Well,
I
I can give you the
apologize for
statistics.
Jamaica.
So, 59% of managers are women. More men are enrolled at the university. I'm sorry, more women are enrolled at the university level, and more girls are also enrolled at the primary level. So, the statistics are similar from most places.
Yeah, and isn't that an interesting phenomena that that you have this flip in a very short period of time, and it's true across a lot of countries. Um, so if the number in the US anyway, roughly young people your age, maybe a little bit younger than you, maybe 25, roughly 50% of them now have a college degree in the current young person generation, roughly 50%. So half of people are getting a college degree. That means that in order to increase the number of people going to college to capture 50% who are actually going to complete college, you have to expand the IQ distribution you're sampling from, right? You have to. You can't just take the top 10% of people with from the IQ distribution and get 50% with a college
Not
degree.
at
So you have
all.
to expand. What we observed is that expansion to lower levels of IQ was greater among women than among men.
All right, Matt. And
And
no, we're going to drop the big gun soon, but continue.
oh, okay. Um, well, I mean, I think women. I think when we talk about the personality factors, I think what you've we find anyway in our research and other people as well, is that women are on average higher on those factors than men. They show, on average, again, there's always exceptions, but on average, they show higher impulse control, greater future orientation, even greater willingness to work hard and confidence in their abilities. So I think that probably helps explain this recent emergence of this flip in the gender ratio.
Well, you are right, but many studies show that women are lower in confidence and self-efficacy. You mentioned women being confident.
Yeah, okay, that might be true. I don't know the literature well enough, and
I
you
follow that literature closely. Women
okay.
are
I'll
lower in
defer to you
confidence.
then. That
They are lower in confidence and self-efficacy. Men are high in risk tolerance. So you're right about women
mhm,
having impulse control. Patience, well, some I've read books and people arguing that men are actually more patient than women. So I guess there's some debate in that era. But for the most part, you're right, except for
mhm,
the part on confidence. Women are not known for
yeah,
confidence, even anecdotally, to get them to come on the show, my show
mhm.
sometimes. No, they will say that they are not interested. You don't get that from the men. But
Oh,
I
okay.
think that what's happening is that originally college was for the best and the brightest, and in the past we had opportunities for men who are not academically inclined. They could go into the trade, and today men are still going to the trades, but college is seen as the apex of achievement. So if you're not college educated, some people may look at it in a different light. I don't agree with that stance, but because we live in an age that places a premium on equity and more people are going to college, it is no longer for the best and the brightest. Whereas originally the brightest men went to college. So for me personally, I think that the rise of women is really a consequence of the equality revolution, because historically the best and the brightest men, they were the first movers and the shakers in society. So what we're seeing is that I wouldn't say that we're reverting back to the norm in the sense that it's really about the best and the brightest men and women who are getting opportunities because of feminism and liberalism. So in that sense, we're reverting to the norm. But it was always about the best and the brightest men. So I'm not surprised that the numbers for ordinary men are receding, because it was usually about the best and the brightest men. And even today, the rich boys from a richer background, they outperform girls in mathematics.
Mhm.
So I think that's the problem. It's the age
Well,
of equality.
consistent with your explanation here is in our sample, um, which is a sample from Minnesota. So it's representative of Minnesota's, makes it unrepresentative of many other regions of the world, but or the United States. But anyway, in our sample, it's a reasonably large sample, 2,500 individuals. Um, when we looked at the parents versus the offspring, and we classified both according to whether or not they had a low IQ, an average IQ, or a high IQ. In the high IQ group, the number of males getting a degree didn't change much from the parents to the offspring, which is consistent with your notion, is that kind of the bright males were going and getting college degrees 25 years ago, and they're still doing it now. A big difference though was observed among the women. Among the women with high IQs, their mothers didn't often get a college degree, but sure enough, the offspring women, the current generation did. So that's where a real large increase in getting a college degree was women with high IQs. Exactly consistent with what you were just saying.
Because Jamaica, Matt, is a fascinating place. So we have like 5 minutes left, so we're going to be quick. But you should do some research on Jamaica. In Jamaica, we talk about male marginalization, but an academic noted that in Jamaica, middle class boys are doing well, as I expected. The problem is that because we're in a more liberal society, we care about the performance of all groups, and working class men have always done worse relative to rich men or working class men who are really brilliant. And that's the problem. It appears
Mhm.
that women are performing because working class men are not doing as well as they did due to the structure of the economy. That's what's
Mhm.
going on. It's not that men are failing. The men we consider to be failures today, 60 years ago, were in the same position, but the economy was different, so they could have a normal 9 to 5 and feed their family, whereas today it's more complicated.
I agree. I agree. I um I, I work at the University of Minnesota. I also work in Denmark,
Or in
and
Denmark.
you're yeah, in Denmark, and I'm in Minnesota right now though. But one of the things about the the Danish system that I like is essentially the what I would call the professionalization of work. And that is that rather than trying to push everybody to go to college, what they try to do is make sure no matter what career you pursue, you are going to become an expert in that area. And there's an educational program for that. So, if you're a teacher, you're going to go to college. But if you're a bricklayer, you also are going to get specific training, and the state will pay for that training. And in fact, you'll get a stipend to become an expert bricklayer. Or I have a good friend there whose daughter became somebody who cuts hair. It took her 3 years to become an expert in that. And during those 3 years, the state paid for her education, but also gave her a stipend to live on. So they didn't weren't just supporting people going to college, they were supporting people in all the various occupations. And because of that, when they come out, I believe that gives you a lot of feeling of it's self-worth. You're an expert in what you're doing and you're valued. Many of my culture here in the US, we don't do that. We try to push everybody into college, which I think is unfortunately a mistake.
It is a mistake. And our last word, we know that this is a mistake because beautiful people, Matt, are making millions on OnlyFans, even though you are so smart.
Yeah, I've
Yes,
never been on
neither
OnlyFans,
have
so I
I.
wouldn't know.
Neither have I. But if you're reading business magazines, they will talk about these influencers on OnlyFans who are making a lot of money just for showing their face or their breasts or whatever. And you're so smart. So there's an opportunity for all of us.
Yeah, is OnlyFans, is that like pornography?
I
I don't
don't know.
know.
I know that maybe it has some porn. I don't know. I just read about it in
Yeah,
business
I just
publications.
know that young people can make a lot of money
Yeah,
going
yes.
on to Only.
Oh, exactly.
So,
Doing all sorts of weird stuff. Stuff that will
but as you know,
traumatize their
Lipton,
grandmother.
yeah, of course, it's important to make money to satisfy your basic needs, but uh, there are more important things in life, like having, a good social and family relationships
Exactly
and
my
an
point.
interesting and
If you,
intellectually engaged life.
yeah, exactly. If you want to become a millionaire by proving to others that you know to masturbate, good for you, but that's not me. No,
Yeah,
not at all.
good.
I don't think yeah, it's capitalism because the market doesn't discriminate, but it's also quite weird that we live in a world where
Mhm.
people can make millions just by being pretty.
Yeah.
It baffles me, but thanks for coming on. We had a great conversation. Bye, Matt.
Okay, yeah, it was nice talking with you, Lipton. I'm sure you're enjoying some good weather down in Jamaica right now.
It's
So
hot. It's really
it's
hot.
hot. Okay,
Okay,
it's
all
not
right.
so hot here in Minnesota,
Hot and
but
rainy. All
okay.
right. Bye.